So first off, money, let's do a quick review on what we did last time. What 3 functions does money must serve?
Medium of exchange.
Medium of exchange, which means that you can spend.
It's measurable.
It's a unit of account,
Holds its value.
which means that it's measurable, and it has to be a store of value, which means that it
Holds value.
holds value over time. Exactly. So know the different types, right? And remember that technically money should be one other thing. It should also be at least slightly scarce. Again, that's weird because how much money is out there in our system, cash-wise? Lots. And the amount of money in the actual money supply, folks, is even more, right? I mean, think about it. How much money do you have sitting in your bank account? Your savings, your checking account. Is that money actually in paper form? No. But it's still money, right?
Yeah.
So, we'll get there. All right. So, what's the difference between fiat money and commodity money? What's fiat money?
It's backed by the law and nothing else.
Yeah. Money by faith. It's money because God told us it was. Or, we believe anyways. By faith. And of course, really by law. And what's commodity money?
Money that serves a purpose other than being money.
Right. Money that has an alternative purpose. So you could say that, gold is money. It's just commodity money because it can also be other things like jewelry. Same with cattle, same with horses, all those sorts of things. In theory, you can consider them money if you want. It's just that they have an alternative purpose, and that's to potentially ride or eat or whatever. Right? So, the caretaker of our money is the Fed. It was created in 1913 by Woodrow Wilson. Why did he create it again?
Stop credit.
Yeah, stop the bank panics, right? There are a whole bunch of bank panics going on. And in order to truly make it safe or to make it more secure, he made it private, okay? Please realize that the Fed is not controlled by the government. It reports to the government twice a year, and the chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve System is actually appointed by the president, right? So Janet Yellen, the newest board chairman, was actually appointed by Barack Obama a couple months ago. And by the way, she is the first female head of the Fed. Very first time. Go women. Power. I agree. Alright, so now before we dive into more of how the Fed is set up and what its really jobs are, we need to know, how does the Fed decide what is our money supply? Right? It's clearly not just the cash, right? It can't just be the amount of paper money or coins that we have floating around in our system. So how do they measure how much money we have? Well, first thing you got to do is remember that money in the money supply, according to the Fed, needs to be spendable in a reasonable amount of time. So really what they mean is that money is anything that you can spend without having to go through an auction or a sale or a lengthy process in order to turn it into basically cash. So your house is not a part of the money supply. It does have a value associated to it, and you can count that as an asset, but you wouldn't count it as a monetary asset on your balance sheet. Okay? And that's sort of the difference between assets and money. Money are things that you can spend. So, the cool part about this stuff is that the Fed came up with a really ingenious way to indicate what it calls money, the money supply, right? So it was come up by an economist who is also a mathematician, which really makes me happy. And so he came up with a name for the money supply, the very first one that the Fed came up with back in the 60s or 70s, and he named it this. M1. M1 is what the money supply is according to the Fed, initially, okay? So that's actually not MI, it's not Mission Impossible, but although
I
that
think it
it might be as well. M1 is what the Fed used to call the money supply. What they call it now are near monies. Okay. What do they mean by near monies? Well, the first thing that has to be near money is the stuff that's more than near money. It's
printed
Money.
It's printed money. It's cash, right? So the first thing that they add to the money supply is all the cash that's out there, okay? Again, out there, not necessarily all the cash that's minted, because if some of that cash is being held by the Fed, that's not a part of the money supply. The money supply is only cash being held by businesses, banks, and people, okay? When the money goes to the Fed, when the Fed is sitting on it, and the Fed does sit on some cash, it's not a part of the money supply, okay? So it's near spendable money by people. Now, what other things are we readily able to spend? Again,
You're able to use your debit card.
well, no, think 70s or 80s first. Was there such a thing as a debit card in the 80s, 70s, 80s?
Chap.
Checks, exactly. So what the Fed did was it said, oh, it counted as money in the money supply all of the money that was sitting in people's checking accounts. Because back in the 80s, 70s, we could easily go to the bank or to the store and write a check for all of our purchases and just pay for it right away, right? Immediately spendable, all right? So near monies are monies that we can spend almost instantly.
Well, people have savings accounts that they can go to the bank and get the
I know,
money
but,
from.
but that would be a little bit longer delay time. It used to take you know, like a day or two to go to the bank, get the money out. Because if it's Saturday afternoon, were banks open on Saturday afternoons back in the 80s? No, banks were always closed. If you wanted to spend your money in your savings account on a Saturday, you couldn't do it. And 2-day wait time to get to that money, that's too long. That's not a reasonable amount of time, according to the Fed. It had to be quick, and that just wasn't quick enough, according to them. Now, the other thing that we did when we went overseas back in the 80s and 90s, how did we bring money overseas? Did we bring cash? Did we bring American dollars?
Travelers
Oh,
checks.
good.
Traveler's checks. And you have to spell traveler's checks the correct way, folks. It's the English way. If you note, if you ever get any traveler's checks, you will note that it is always spelled C-H-E-Q-U-E for traveler's check. It's a very British concept, and therefore it's very appropriate that we use them in such a fashion at all times. You must be snooty whenever you use a traveler's check, because
The traveler.
It means you're better than everyone.
that's absolutely right. You can hold your nose up and say, I don't smell you, you're not really there. Whatever. Anyways, it's just been a practice. Any traveler's checks that I have ever bought, and I've traveled, overseas a bunch of times, folks. I used to use traveler's checks. It didn't matter what bank I bought them from. They always spelled it C-H-E-Q-U-E-S. Don't ask me why, but they do. Okay? So this is the way the Fed initially defined the money supply in the 70s, 80s, and obviously, given today's economy, that's not enough. So they needed to expand what the definition of money supply is. Guess what they call the expanded version?
M2.
Oh, yeah! Which was so awesome. I mean, that's just
Creative.
great. That's so math nerdy that it's awesome, right? I mean,
You are way too excited about that.
I mean, come on, it's the Fed, right? This is like the most powerful entity in the entire country. I mean, it used math and stuff and expected people to know what it meant. Oh, it was great.
It's money, it's numbers.
Yeah, it's okay. So, this is my own definition of M2, just so that you know. It's not so near monies, but it's still near money. It's still stuff that we can spend pretty easily, okay? So, M2, technically, folks, it includes M1, okay? So, realize that M2 has M1 built into it already. I mean, they add all this stuff up, but they're just now adding more stuff. So, income the 90s and the 2000, the 2010s, not just checking accounts,
Savings accounts.
savings accounts, right? Because that's what we tended to tap our debit cards to. And so we could now start spending the money in our savings account without having to wait to go and cash them, or having to wait to go to the bank and transfer the money into our checking accounts, right? It was just easy, right? It was just
Would credit count in this?
Yeah, credit cards.
credit cards, yeah, but again, remember that credit cards aren't really money, so we can't really count the value in our credit cards, because we really, if you set, I mean, I have a credit card in my name that has a $25,000 credit limit. Does that mean there should be $25,000 worth of money available in my money supply from that? I never charge more than $100 on it.
Charge more than
I've never gotten to 1,000 on that particular card, because it's my own personal one. I don't think my wife doesn't use that one.
Oh, so it's a secret.
You can't have a secret from your wife monetarily. She has to know about it. It's part of the marriage process, in case you didn't know. Good or bad, it is. Anytime you open up a credit card, technically they will send a mail to your house with my name on it, telling me that my wife opened a credit card, if that ever happens, right? So if she ever opens one in her name, the bank that's servicing that mortgage or loan must send me the notice, because technically I'm liable for it.
It's not always the case.
They're breaking the law then.
I think it's
technically.
by state.
Yeah, it could vary by state, but
But your
technically.
wife gets the mail first. So.
Well, yeah, true. It's not me, but it's against the law for her to open up a piece of mail that says my name on it,
What
not
about-
hers. Damn it.
What about a gift
Yeah,
card?
because that's.
I'm sure you're gonna
so
prosecute her if she does.
True. All right, so what other gift cards are essentially the same sort of thing as traveler's checks. They're considered spent money
It's already
already.
in the M1.
Yeah, it's already in the M1 technically.
Even though they
nowadays.
didn't exist.
Yeah, they didn't exist, but they were sort of rolled up in there. So the other thing that they added in here, this is sort of weird, but bear with me. CD. You guys know what a CD is?
Yeah.
Or just to be safe, right? A certificate of deposit. Basically, it's an investment. It's a certificate of deposit that is less than 1 year from maturity. So in other words, it has to be less than a 1-year CD, and less than $250,000. So if you had a CD that was going to mature in less than a year and was worth, say, $125,000, the Fed assumes that for you, that money is stuff that you're going to spend relatively easily, right? What's happened is that it's become real easy for us as consumers to go into a bank and just say, look, this CD that I said I wanted to earn 2.5% on for a full year, I don't want it anymore. I don't need the interest. I need to go buy a car, and the car needs to be a $120,000 car, so give me the $120,000, please. And the bank would say, okay. We break the CD, give you the money, take out any penalties that it had to take, and you can go buy your $115,000 car. Because we do that. Well, not you and I, of course, but in the rest of the country, there are enough people doing that the Fed recognized it and had to add it to the money supply, because we were doing it. Right? People would just go in and cash CDs before they were actually mature and spend the money. So they added it in, right? And again, the reason they're doing this is so that they can keep track of how much money do all of us have added together so that we can spend it, all right? So this M2, technically there's a new M as well, there's an M3. That's been relatively new. It's not relatively accepted by everyone yet, but if you go looking on the websites where they talk about the Fed's money supply, there will often be an M3 in there. And basically that's another even further expanded money supply on top of M2 that includes additional monies that we spend. Again, it's treasury notes and treasury bonds for people under the age of 21. Because what do a lot of teenagers do when they need to go out and spend money? They sell their treasury bonds early, right? So if you need a new car and you're 16 or 17 years old, just got your license, how do you pay for it? Well, you don't run around with that kind of money in cash, right? But your aunt, your uncle, your brothers and your sisters or your nephews and whatnot, they bought you those things, right, when you were born. Well, let's just cash them in a little early. So we can go and get our car. Right? Again, enough people are doing that they're starting to put that stuff into M3. Again, it's not maybe you guys, but welcome to the American economy and how it runs. Okay, so this tends to be what the money is. So M2 is the money in our system that we can impulse shop with. And it doesn't have to be impulse shopping. It can be just regular shopping as well. I mean, obviously this includes going to the store and buying groceries and buying gas every, X number of days when your tank gets empty, however quick that is for you guys, right? But this is how much money we have to spend, and the Fed wants to know this so that they can tell how much available liquidity is in the system, and we need to fine-tune it so that it's at a level where we're comfortable, all right? And that's their job, okay? So this is how the Fed measures it, right? So one of the things, of course, that I'm going to ask you to do is find out what M2 is right now. Extra credit. Find out what M2 is. Extra credit. Find our current value of M2. Again, that should be, it's either in Treasury Direct or BEA, one of the two. Alright, so that's just a fun little piece of history about how the Fed takes up. Alright, so, Alright, so when old Woody Wilson decided to create the Fed, there's a sort of an interesting map in your book somewhere that shows you how the Fed was divvied up initially. It was divvied up into 12 districts, right? 12 district branches.
Page 400.
Page 400? So if you look on page 400, it'll give you a little picture of where the branches were and what regions of the country they control, or the money supply in those regions are controlled. Where are most of the Federal Reserve banks right now? Well, there's one in San Francisco. That covers the entire West Coast. That includes Washington.
Most of them are in the Midwest.
Most of them are in the Midwest and the Eastern Seaboard, right?
Yeah.
Why is that?
That's
Closer to
started.
Washington.
Yeah, 1913. What was going on in 1913, folks? Was there a whole lot of business going on the West Coast?
Yeah.
Not really yet. I mean, the
Oh,
West
you
Coast
said
hadn't
West Coast.
exploded. Yeah, West Coast was dead
I thought
for the
you
most
said
part. They were taking care of our gold, but that was about it. In the East Coast, that's where all business was taking place. So that's where all of the branches are, right? 12 district branches. There are 27 sub-branches. Guess where most of the 27 sub-branches are?
Midwest and East Coast.
Midwest and the East Coast, right? Sorry, West Coast. And West Coast. Basically, all of the sub-branches that the Fed created was to fill in all of the gaps, right? So where there's a whole lot of land and a whole lot of business going on in this map, they started putting more federal branches available in that region. So the southeastern seaboard down in Florida and Alabama and Louisiana and stuff, there's a couple of sub-branches in there. There's a bunch of new ones in Texas and Arizona. Because again, that's where a lot of business is taking place, and the Fed needs to sort of subdivide those regions a little bit more finely so that they can keep track of money better, right? And obviously there's a ton more in West Coast, where technically there was one branch taking care of 6 Western Seaboard states. So now, your money, if you have one, let's see, do I have an old one and a new one? And those are both new ones, bummer. Ah, but the one is an old one, perfect. So, interesting tidbit about money, folks. Used to be that all of our bills had a little seal on it with a letter inside of it, right? Where that letter is now is it's the very beginning of the serial number on the bottom. That's the new letter. That letter represents one of the 12 district branches. So each one of these has a number inside of it. The letter in the circle that you see here is corresponding to the number of the branch that money was minted from, right? So if you had letter A, that means it was printed up there in the northeastern seaboard in Boston, right? If you had the letter B, that means it was printed in New York. So there was a way that you could track all of these dollars to exactly which branch it was so that you could deal with it accordingly, right? So that you could track the money. Because of course that was part of what the Fed was doing, was tracking the money. That's its number one job for the Fed, is tracking where all of our money is. And again, tracking is only a minor case of it, right? Tracking the cash is a very, very small piece. All right, so there is a 12-person board. So this is, board of directors, right? Just like any other company, right? A regular company that's been incorporated has 12 board members. The Fed is driven the same way, right? The president of the board they're appointed by the President of the United States. And they are appointed every 4 years on off-election years. Okay? So when the president is elected in 2008 or 2012, or I guess 2016 is the next time, every 2 years into their term, that's when they pick a new Fed chair. Okay? So 2014 is when Janet Yellen got appointed to the new board of directors for the Fed. In 2018, that's when her term will be done, and either they can continue to hire her or they can find a new person, right? Before Janet Yellen was Ben Bernanke. He was in there for 8 years, 2 terms. Before Ben Bernanke was Alan Greenspan. He was in there for 5 terms. He was in there for 20 years. Maybe even 6, I think. 5 or 6, one of the two. He served through 3-4 different presidents. Again, cool part about it was he was appointed by both Democrats and Republicans, right? Didn't matter. Nice thing about the Fed is that you don't pick them partisan-wise. You pick them because they're the smartest damn person in the room, right? The Fed chairman has to be, 1, a personality that can handle pressure, and 2, doesn't give a crap one way or the other about politics. They have to be...
And 3, be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah. They got to be pretty boring, too, for the most part. All right. 5 of the members on the board must be presidents of the 12 district branches. And actually what they do is they rotate those through the different branches. So at any one given time, 5 of the 12 branch presidents are also board members on the board of directors for the actual Fed itself. The other members of the board are actually appointed by the president, and they're appointed to 12-year terms. I think it's 12. It's either 12 or 15, one of the two. They're really long terms anyways. And generally speaking, these appointees, they take forever. They have to be nominated by the president, and then they have to be voted in by the Senate. So there's a Senate nominating committee that will actually affirm the president's appointment. Guess how many of these have been appointed during Barack Obama's presidency?
No.
0. Not one of his appointments to the Federal Reserve Board have been approved by the Senate yet. So all of those board seats are still sitting wide open. Not uncommon when the Senate and the president are not the same party, do they vote them through? Yeah, it's really annoying. But anyways, the board tends to just follow the chairman's lead, right? So the chairman of the board they kind of run the show for the most part, but technically it is a board, and the board could sit down and vote over the chairman's or chairwoman's, opinion, but it's rarely done. They're very rarely done anyway, so does or doesn't happen very often, just so that you know. You can, at any given time, go to the Fed's website and read their minutes. All of the board meetings by the Fed are completely public record. You can go look up at them anytime you want. Even though they're a private entity, they do drop all of their minute notes 2 to 3 months after the meeting takes place. So the board meets, same as the board of BTC meets once a month. And then every 2 to 3 months, those minutes get posted online, and you can look over them if you want. Having read lots of those minutes over my career, they're really exciting. I would encourage you to go take a look at them. But if you've ever read any minutes from a board meeting, you know that they're really dry and boring. But you could then see what they're trying to do. All right? So, what's the goal of the Fed? Technically, it's a private company. What did we say most private companies are trying to do?
Profit.
Profit. That is not the goal of the Federal Reserve System. What's the goal of the Fed?
Keep everything
Keep
in
track of all the
check.
money.
Keep track of all the money. That's one of its jobs, but that's not its goal. What were the things that I always asked you at the beginning of this half of the class?
Keep monitoring the GDP and that for the amount of inflation or deflation that we're.
What are the 3 goals of the macroeconomy?
Employment.
GDP, employment.
GDP, employment, and...
Stable price.
Okay, guess what the 3 goals of the Fed are?
Those 3 things.
Increasing GDP, full employment, and stable prices. Same goals as anybody who's taking care of a macroeconomy, which is exactly why the Fed is considered a macroeconomic caretaker, because the goals of the Fed are exactly the same 3 goals of the macroeconomy. Now, there have been some arguments in the last 4 or 5 years where people are talking about how the Fed is trying to do too much by doing this. And really what they would like the Fed to do is to just focus on this thing right here. Just worry about stabling prices out. And that's really their only job. Because this trying to make the economy better, that's not their job, right? I mean, that's
Government.
that really should be the government's job, damn it, right? I mean, why isn't the government doing their
That's what I'm
job?
saying. If you got the government and them doing it, well, you don't need one or the other.
Right. Wouldn't it be nice if they were all the same? But of course, how effective has the government been at passing laws to try and keep the economy stable?
Extreme.
They've been really good at it, right? I mean, you've seen lots of laws get passed in the last, say, 4 to 6 years of President Obama's terms where the economy has been helped, right? Right? I mean, he bailed out all the banks, he bailed out all the car companies, right?
Came up with healthcare.
There's healthcare now, right? In theory. All right, so one of the things that people are having arguments about is whether or not the Fed should be doing the same thing the government's doing. Some arguments are that, well, it's the government's job, it's not the Fed's job. What might be an argument that the Fed should be doing this?
Because the government can't do it very well.
Because the government doesn't do a very good job of it. Maybe we need a private entity that's doing it, that doesn't have to be beholden to voters and really just only has to look at the economy and just do what the smart thing to do is, right? Part of the problem with our government is that it is driven by our voting district's interests, right?
Well, it's filled with bureaucracy because a law has to be made in order for something to happen.
Exactly!
So if the Fed did it,
It could happen like
it
that.
could happen like that.
Exactly, and that's exactly what the Fed's been doing, what it's been doing the last 4 years, because it could do it instantly. And they did. Right? Who's been pushing the economy for the last 4 years? It's not been the government, folks, it's been the Fed. And you'll learn why in a little bit. Alright, so that's part of their goals, right? So, how's the Fed do it?
They have a board meeting.
Magic.
12 guys get in a room and decide this is what we're going to do.
That's absolutely right.
Isn't that a jerk?
The way they do it is by applying monetary policy, which is what Chapter 19 is all about. So this is where in Chapter 19 we'll talk about what the Fed does to try and fix the economy. I don't want to get to Chapter 19 yet, so before we get there though, that's what their goal is to apply monetary policy to fix GDP, however it needs to be fixed, if it needs to be fixed, to try and get full employment, and to try and keep prices stable. Now, when the Fed's charter was written, it was given a bunch of jobs or tasks that it had to do, right? And the number one job that it had to do, of course, was take care of the money supply. That is the number one job of the Fed, is to keep track of how much money is in the system. What are the other jobs the Fed must do? It's actually clear checks. Every check that you write, in fact, every electronic file transfer that you do, has to be cleared by the Fed. That's their job. The people who keep track of where money is, it's not your bank. All your bank does is gets a spreadsheet report from the Fed and then updates their spreadsheets from it. That's it. I mean, they charge way the hell too much money to do it, but that's all a bank's job is to be a throughput, to be an intermediary between you and the Fed, because the Fed deals with everything. When you write a check, what the bank does with the check is it looks at the numbers on your check and says, which Federal Reserve branch does this check belong at? Wherever it is, that they send it to them. It's the Fed who says, ooh, who is this going to? Where is their account? Oh, if it's in the same branch, then they just internally transfer the money from the two accounts internally that the Fed's keeping track of, where the money is, transfers the money, and then sends a report to the bank. One bank that holds your money and one bank that holds who you wrote the checks to money, saying, debit and credit these accounts accordingly. It's all the job of the Fed. The bank's job is just to copy what the Fed does. All right? And again, any bank that has checking accounts associated with it has to supply the Fed with information so that they can deal with the check cashing process. That used to be one of the things that separated banks from other fiduciary institutions, was whether or not you could write checks. It used to be that if you were in a savings and loan or a credit union, you didn't have checking accounts because they weren't a part of the Fed system. That changed in the 80s. They were all given the right to do that. So that's one of the jobs of the Fed, is to clear these checks. So they got to do it. And again, it's been set up to do that, so it's not so bad anyways. Now, It's going to take care of the money supply. The other thing, of course, it has to do they're supposed to be regulating the banks so that the banks don't do anything that might cause our economy to almost crash.
Emphasis on supposed to.
Again, this is why a lot of people were pissed off in 2008, 2009, because a lot of the blame for the crash lay within the banking industry. Bankers had come up with some really clever schemes to try and basically earn money faster. And unfortunately, what it did was it made the bank statements or the bank's liquidity or viability less secure. And the Fed said, oh no, banks would never do anything that would risk their investors. Therefore, we don't have to worry about anything they do. Because they would never have enough risk that they might crash, right? They would never do that because our banks are good.
No, other than the fact that they did.
Yeah, I mean, prior to 2008, that was a great statement. Everybody bought it. Well, nowadays, the Fed has been stepping on banks a lot harder. They've been requiring more reports, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, what are banks doing? As soon as they get regulated, what do?
Lord.
Yeah, they get pissed off, right? I mean, anybody that gets more regulations is mad because what does a regulation do?
Doesn't let you use things.
Yeah, costs money. You have to fill out forms. You have to fill out reports. You have to meet requirements. Good God, that's terrible. What a burden. Whatever. Anyways, the last.
Run a business the way we want to.
Oh yeah. It's that they were actually requiring all these things to be validated as well. Before they just expected them to have a report that says we're safe. Now they actually have to create a report that says we're safe, as opposed to just write it down. The other thing the Fed has to do is to keep track of U.S. gold reserves. Why would the Fed be tasked with keeping track of our U.S. gold reserves? Again, think 1913, not 2013. What was going on in 1913?
Gold rush.
There was some gold rush going on, but think about what our money was. It was commodity money back in 1913, right? I mean, back in that day, our money was tied to the amount of precious gems that our, Fort Knox had in its vault, right?
Minting the coins out of the actual product.
Exactly.
Silver and gold.
Right, so they had to keep track of it so that we knew how much money to print. Obviously, nowadays, folks, when our money is fiat money instead of commodity money, does it matter how much gold we have in our vaults? No. Not really. And in fact, most of the gold in Fort Knox and in all of the different Federal Reserve vaults, it's not ours. We've sold it as a country to pay off debts. Why not, right? What do we need it for? If the gold isn't ours, right? When somebody goes to rob a bank and there happen to be U.S. gold reserves in there, that we could have lost that money, right? So what the Fed did with most of its gold was they used it to pay debts. So if you ever get a chance, I strongly encourage this, if you ever go to the New York Federal Reserve Bank, it's in downtown New York, that's where they hold most of the gold reserves. It used to be where they held all of the U.S. gold reserves. Now what they've done is they've taken the vault that's in the basement and they've divided it up into a whole bunch of other different vaults. And on each of the vaults it has a big sign. And on the sign it says things like Japan, China, Germany, Switzerland, Greece, right? I mean, basically, the vaults in the U.S. Federal Reserve that used to hold our gold, now we've sold that gold to those other countries, and those countries said, well, don't ship us the gold. I mean, what's going to happen if you ship a ton of gold from the U.S. to, say, Germany?
Shanghai.
It's going to get Shanghai, right? I mean, come on. Because the Fed has to report every month what it did with all of its gold. Well, if you're telling people that you're going to put a ton of gold on a ship, and it's going to be sailing to Europe. Yeah. So what they did, right? I mean, what the U.S. government has done is it's taken all of our vaults and just said, look, hey, if Japan needs to pay Russia a certain amount of money, and they want to do it using gold, they send the note to the Federal Reserve in New York and say, take 5 pounds of gold out of the Japanese vault and move it to the Russian vault. And that's what the Federal Reserve now does. One of its jobs is to transfer gold from one vault to the other. And of course, I mean, they also have to keep the gold safe and all of their stuff. So what are these countries doing?
They're paying us to do it.
That's absolutely right. The Federal Reserve has become a bit of a, a security agency.
Storage
A
facility.
storage facility. They get paid a buttload of money every year to keep track of everybody else's gold.
Plus, they look at it as, oh, well, United States, nobody's gonna come in there and try and take all the gold out of the United States.
Right, exactly. 'Cause
We can
right.
keep it safer for them than they can keep it for themselves.
Absolutely right.
Look what
right.
happened to Germany when World War II was over, what happened to everything
Oh
of
yeah.
value in Germany?
Oh yeah, it was just looted
Just-
to no. Yeah. So the rest of the world is perfectly okay with paying our government to keep track of their gold for them. Fort Knox. It's actually a money-earning prospect for the United States government.
Plus,
They
it's
make
pretty
more money
convenient
than
for them, because if it's all in one place, they can move it around.
Oh yeah, they've got train tracks, right?
Yeah.
So that they can literally move like 8 tons of gold at a time by just putting it all in this big huge cart that moves in a train track that ties all the vaults together. And then you see some old guy, they're always an old guy, right? The
Well, I
guy
think
who
it's
actually
electric,
moves.
he just pushes a button.
Well, they actually want the manual. They want it manual.
Oh, then.
Right now it's all manual. They don't want it to be automatic because then someone could hack into the system and automatically transfer gold from one place to the other. It's done manually.
Mm.
It's all videotaped so that the countries can watch the video so they can see exactly what he did. I mean, it's really kind of a cool thing. So if you ever get a chance, you're in New York, go to the Fed and go and watch them transfer for gold back and forth. They don't let the public into to see that very often, but there's a few Saturdays every year that they'll do it. It's really cool if you get a chance. One, because you can see all the damn gold. And it's all in bars, folks. I mean, it's cool shit.
They should make that into one of those movements.
All right, so these are the jobs of the Fed. Now, realize that, put a little star right there. Prior to 1980, the number of banks in the banking system that were members of the Fed, like about 30% of our banks. In other words, the Fed only had control of about 30% of the banking industries. So, if you think about that, what does that mean? How much of the banking industry did they not have control of?
77%.
That's a lot of banks, folks. All right. Now, again, realize that the banks back then, they separated banks from savings and loans and credit unions. Savings and loans and credit unions were not a part of the banking system; they were separate. Right? And again, those institutions were meant not to deal with checks. They were only supposed to deal with savings and investments. Right? That used to be their jobs. But in 1980. This act was passed. Does anybody know why this act was passed? Remember what happened in the 80s, the early 80s, Mark?
Not necessarily. Not sure what you're referring to. Savings and loans crashed.
Yep. Savings and loans crisis. So what happened in the late 70s, early 80s was that the savings and loan industry, which again was not being governed by the Fed, was not being regulated by the Fed in any way, shape, or form. They were all self-regulated entities. Went into basically doing what all of the banks did in 2008, 2009. They did it back in 1979. Slightly different, but a variation on the theme. They basically hedged their bets, guaranteeing certain financial institutions or financial packages for customers, and then when the customers demanded payment on it, the savings and loans didn't have the cash for it, and then they went into bank panics because people tried to draw their money out of the savings and loans, and the savings and loans didn't have the amount of money that they needed. Crash. So like 25 to 40% of all savings and loans back in the 70s failed. And again, when your monetary system is based on a whole bunch of businesses that go bankrupt, what happens to your money supply?
There's quite a few people that had the same issues with their mortgages and stuff because they had their mortgages through the savings and
Yep.
loans rather than the banks.
Yep.
So they lost their homes. too,
Yep.
a lot of them.
Absolutely, same,
But
almost
didn't
the
they,
same
didn't
thing.
they back then, you said something about they didn't have checks, but they had what they called draft accounts?
Yes, they
where
could get,
They could write.
they could
a
get
check,
money, they could get money orders is what they were called.
Well, yeah, it was kind of, but you could write it to a retail store or whatever, you could write that draft to them,
Yep.
but a lot of them wouldn't take them.
Yep,
It started to get where, right towards when this was happening.
yeah, that was just like,
Yeah,
nope,
nope.
refused to do it, right,
Nope.
and that's
No
again,
mistake
because
in that.
they weren't backed by anything, right?
No.
Yeah, that was part of the problem, right? So in the 80s, the S&L crisis was a problem, and so what happened was that this act is what has turned the Fed into the powerhouse that it is. It expanded the control that the Fed had to basically include everybody. Okay, so. The first thing that this act did was it gave the Fed control over not just banking industry, not just the banks, but also the savings and loans, also the credit unions. Basically, they set their reserve requirements. So it gave them the power to regulate, right? Because-
Brokerage businesses and
Oh, yeah.
everything.
All that stuff, yeah. All those sorts of hidden financial institutions that were running a lot of our money supply banking, they were hidden from the Fed. And the Fed was like, how can we take care of the money supply if we don't have control over 70% of it? They're like, there's nothing we can do. So anyways, that was the first thing it did. Now, the other thing that it did, and this is... So any financial institution can borrow from the Fed. So it used to be that you had to be a member of the Federal Reserve System in order to be able to go to the Fed and look and say, look, hey, I'm getting a little bit of a mini run on my bank, I need $2 or $3 million in cash. The Fed would say, no problem, right? One of those branch banks would just ship the money out like that and they'd have it the next day. Savings and loans, credit unions, well, they didn't have that kind of power. If they ran out of cash,
We're out of cash.
they were out of cash.
They were in business.
Yeah, more than likely they were out of business. Okay, so this was, again, and all of these things are give and take things, right? Remember that if all of these, if the Fed all of a sudden has control over all of these savings and loans and credit unions, what are those savings and loans and credit unions thinking? I just got a new big brother. Would you be happy if all of a sudden someone came in and said, I now get to regulate all of your money at any time I want, Shannon?
No.
Would you be happy?
No.
Are you good at it?
I mean, even if you could prove that you're good at it, would you want me to do that?
No.
No, you don't want anybody else playing in your stuff, right? So all of these credit unions and savings and loans were like, well, you better give us something in return. And so this is what they got in return, was the right to borrow from the Fed whenever they wanted. Right? So credit unions could say, hey, look, I got a little mini run, I need $2 million in cash, can you loan it to me? Oh, and by the way, loan it to me at a low rate. And that's what the Fed does. When it lends money to its member banks, those member banks pay almost no interest whatsoever. All of these guys were, if they had to borrow money from another bank, they made it pay, right? So that was one of the give and takes. Now, there were a couple of other things, make sure I don't do them backwards. There were a couple of other gives and takes. All right, so, it also opened up checking accounts, official checking accounts, standard banking services to any of these financial institutions. So U.S. savings and loans could now create checking accounts. Credit unions could create checking accounts. They also had access to buying and selling U.S. Treasury securities, right? So you could go to your credit union and say, I want to buy a $100 savings bond for my niece or nephew. And again, that institution could buy those things directly. Whereas before, you had to be a bank. You had to be a member of the Federal Reserve System. So basically it said, okay guys, you get to be able to do more stuff. Now, the take from this it'll seem weird, but what the banking industry wanted, so this is something that was good for the credit unions and the savings and loans. This is what was good for the banking industry.
They could get them higher interest rates.
They could get higher interest rates. Why would banks want to be able to have higher interest rates? And what the hell was the Fed doing putting a limit on those banks' interest rates? Well, again, think about what was going around in the late 70s and early 80s. Interest rates, folks, were hovering around 14%. In 1984, it was 15%. But the Fed had told its banks, look, you can't charge or pay more than 10 or 11% interest. I forget what the number was. And so when people had money and they wanted to earn really good interest, the bank would only give them 10 or 11%. The savings and loans and the credit unions, they could give them anything they wanted, right? Because they weren't regulated by the Fed. So they could say, well, for 12%, we'll take your money. And so all of a sudden, this is where the savings and loans had tons of liquidity because they could pay their members higher interest rates. So we would all go to the credit union and say, wow, I can get 13% for my money. Great, here's $100,000 or however much I had. And so those institutions, savings and loans and credit unions, were loaded with cash. All these deposits. And so what they started to do was to say, well, we need to earn money off of this, so we need a loan. So they started loaning money to lots and lots of more people. And of course, when you're desperate to give out a loan, you give a loan to anybody who's walking in off the street. And, you know, I was walking in off the street in the 80s, and I was like 60, well, however old I was. And I was walking in saying, I need a loan to buy a car. The savings and loan place is like, sweet, you need a car? Great, here's $20,000. And oh, by the way, the interest rates are 15%, but I'm sure you'll have enough money to pay me back. Because you're 16 and you don't have a job. But I have the money, so I'm going to give it to you so that I can. And did I, as a good citizen of the U.S., did I pay my loan off?
No.
Regularly? You better. No, of course I didn't, right? So they made a whole bunch of bad loans, and that's why they had the S&L crisis. So in order to stop that from happening anymore, right, the banks said, hey, look, no more limits on interest rates. So the Fed said, fine, no problem, we'll accept that. And so then interest rates were even across the board, right? There wasn't a guaranteed better deal at the savings and loans of the credit unions than it was in the banks. So, this Monetary Act, basically what this did was it made the Fed the ruler of the banking industry. Entirely, right? I mean, there are still financial institutions that exist outside of the Fed, right? These are the new
Loan
entities that are
sharks.
being, well, I mean, there's always loan sharks,
That's what they
right?
are.
I mean, there's, you know, the
Private security companies where they'll
exactly.
borrow you wherever.
yeah, they'll lend you hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you know,
25%.
25% interest, and oh, by the way, if you don't pay, it's a pinky, and if you don't pay again, it's a thumb.
Well, I'm not sure they do that anymore.
The new institutions that are being created now are these large hedge funds. Hedge funds are, again, they're like a financial institution. They have the right to take your money, and you invest in them, and they provide you with an investment that that pays a certain percentage return as long as they're investing in stock markets and all this other stuff. It's a financial institution, but are they dealing with cash and checks and investments?
They're not regulated by the Fed.
They're not regulated by the Fed, folks, but they're another one of those institutions that right now the Fed's kind of looking at going, And these hedge funds, folks, are sitting on billions of dollars. They are not regulated. Always makes me a little nervous as I invest my 401k dollars, my IRA dollars into these essentially money market manager funds that are outside the control of any financial institution. But it's part of the game. This is the end of chapter 18. Kind of get you some homework for the weekend. 2, 7, and 8. Number two is asking you whether certain things can be considered money. If you tell me that they are not money, you must tell me why. Okay? And to tell me that something is not money means that it fails one of the three functions of money. Alright, so don't just say yes or no to all of those answers. You gotta tell me why. Number 7 is just, again, look at it. Number 8 is an opinion. More than one sentence. Basically, it's asking, should the Fed be controlled by the government or not? I want you to tell me yes or no and why. Give me 2 sentences at least. And it's purely an opinion. You will not be wrong. As long as you write me more than 2 sentences, you will get all the points on the question. But I'd like you to tell me why you think it should or shouldn't be controlled by the government. So, it's not an overly long homework assignment, but don't forget all the extra credit that I've been throwing out there. Get that into as well. 3 points. Don't turn it down. Especially if all you gotta do is do a web search.